must be a team.
Business is war. It's dog eat dog, rat eat rat.
You gotta have a problem that you want to solve.
You think I will not think? We're going to have to tear down, rebuild, reconfigure, rethink the whole thing.
Hi, I'm William Bryant, and today I'm going to do a brief excerpt on kind of what I call a foundational strategy. The reason why is because I think that the data-driven component that companies are going for, and it's an area really that CFOs and financial leaders have to concentrate on, can be used kind of in an overall intertwined methodology. Okay, and I'll get into that a little bit. But the point being that the data and consideration of the life cycle comes from the processes, because processes create data naturally. The question then becomes, okay, what applications are capturing what data? Where are we moving or migrating this to, or how do we access it? And then kind of beyond that, like in between those steps is, wherever it's stored, you can store it in such a way that it becomes kind of curated and optimized. You'll be more familiar in relational databases where you use, say, SQL, and you're able to organize into tables and views. And then those can then be imported into whatever you're using for your tools, whether it be some kind of a BI like Power BI or Tableau, or just, flat into a spreadsheet application like Excel. And so when you actually do the query in, you can open up the Power Query Editor, and you can do other, they're kind of like, they're SQL folding type queries where you can, do a little bit of manipulation of the data that you didn't necessarily do when you were actually doing the SQL query itself. And by doing this and setting this up, you can create a situation where the star schema or the snowflake schema or whatever you're setting up is curated just how each department or whoever's doing the modeling needs it. Okay, and the time that's saved by doing that, kind of sends the baseline for all of your reporting, all of your modeling, all your visualizations, any forecasting, anything that you're doing. And it doesn't necessarily have to be all from the SQL setup. There are going to be certain things that you're going to be setting up in your tables and views where you just kind of get it prepped and ready. And say, for example, you use Power BI. And Power BI allows for you to import data and create a workspace where you're actually setting up all of the data sets, and then you can have the admin select the ability to build off of those data sets. So it's like a centralized location for all the data sets that are going to be used, and people just access those data sets. So you have a singular location where things can be refreshed, and those are the only data sets that are going to be used. You have the source of truth and all that kind of fun stuff. But you can kind of get into, or hopefully visualize what I'm talking about by setting up a foundation for that data, which comes from all of the processes and applications you have, because whatever data that you're collecting is also you also have to consider the process, the application, the integration, the automation, in addition to that mapping of where the data's come from and how you're going to set up to then report for those various areas. And so it really becomes kind of a layered approach to the way you look at your company. And then again, like I said, when you are setting these things up and you get them tailored how you need to, it saves time. And the refresh and automated or updated, whether you use a macro or whatever, the single touch refreshes and the way you set up your models, you shouldn't need to do a lot of manual updates to them. For example, if you do a 13-week cash flow, you can set up your formulas so that 13-week period is continually cycling through and moving ahead. You don't ever have to touch it. I know a lot of people, that gets a little bit into your skill set on whatever, you're able to do for formulas, whether it be in, SQL, the Power Query Editor, or Excel or Power BI. But there are ways where you can do this where it's minimal contact and all you're really doing is just making sure that it's operating properly. Now, to go a little bit further into this, of course, the better your data is, the better you can construct performance metrics, the better you can, construct, let's work, up, the better you can, do your objectives and goals, your tactics, overall strategy, right? I mean, everything comes from data because you have to figure out how your operations are even working before you can figure out, hey, where can we get to, right? Kind of your gap analysis. But also, what other data can you collect? You can do external data and evaluations. You can do, to some degree, competitor analysis, grab data on economic data, U.S. Census, so on. All of the data that is available, yes, it's a lot, but it is manageable, bearing in mind that you have somebody who's able to address data and understands a little bit about, data science, statistics, a little bit about IT. You don't have to be necessarily an expert in those areas, but understanding it and being able to interact with the individuals who are going to be in those areas is kind of essential at this point in time. As they say, the fastidious accounting clerk is really kind of, yes, that's your bread and butter of finance operations, your financial management, cash management, receivables, payables, the whole nine, right? The whole conversion cycle, working capital and all that. But you have to extend beyond that. And getting into the data is the way you do that. You don't make decisions without it. And so that's kind of the idea. And of course, it can't be at a high level. You have to push for higher granularity. The only way to do that is to have people who can manipulate and analyze the data using tools for things like data science to get into that level, because then you're able to do true cost analytics. You can't really get a good grasp on costs, and you've done this. I'm sure, if you've ever done an analysis and you say, well, such and such, our cost of goods is out of whack relative to our revenues for whatever reason. Well, okay, we have to stop and do an analysis on this. So you then go in and you have to look at, okay, well, was it, the materials? Was it the labor? Did our freight costs go up? What exactly was it, right? You always have to go in there anyway and do a granular analysis. If you're able to have your data set up in such a way that you've already got it kind of, curated for that kind of analysis, it doesn't take as much time. And of course, I'm kind of leaning to the way you set up for contribution margin analysis and your variable cost, fixed cost structure, because from there you get your cost volume profit, break-even analysis. You really do get real variance analysis because you can go kind of from a standard costing, which is almost like a benchmark on whatever you think your material and labor cost should be, and then see how and why that has changed given whatever period you've done your budget for. Contribution margin is really a better profitability measure when you're doing profitability on product lines or segments, divisions of a company. It just is usually avoided because of the fact that you do have to separate the variable from the fixed costs. But you get other benefits as well. I mean, you do get to see operating leverage, right? And I mean, you can fine tune, you can find your financial leverage because those end up being the fixed charge portions. There are numerous benefits that you can get out of that setup. It all starts with data, the way you arrange it and set it up, and that's usually why people kind of avoid it, because they're so busy trying to just do uploads and CSV files, one at a time, that it's a long process to try to carry out. But it doesn't have to be. And, when I've done it for tools, I haven't used anything, spectacular. I was just simply using Excel or Power BI and a centralized database, or an ERP system that allowed a connection for like what's called an OData connection. And that's similar to your ODBC if you've ever connected to data. That's online database connector. Same kind of principle, right? You connect up tables, you can query them in, and of course you can refresh that query. So when I talk about foundational strategy, it really is multi-layered, and that's because IT, from what it is, I mean, and obviously everybody's got to use heavy applications. It is intertwined into all of the aspects of a company and operations. It produces data. The way the data is organized creates a better structure for all kinds of reporting, analysis, forecasting, the whole works. And the way you do the analysis then becomes even better because contribution margin ends up being better for strategy development and planning and forecasting. And so the whole foundation really comes into developing IT capabilities as a core competency. And yes, your IT can be a competency, and you don't have to necessarily be an IT company for it to be so. You just have to be good with data and get to that point where you can use that data to make real decisions. So I guess that kind of covers my entire point, and hopefully it makes sense. It's just a different approach than what people are used to, because when they look at data and how large the sets are, they don't necessarily understand that to be a data-driven company, it comes into how you arrange it, that data lifecycle. You can look at it. It's collecting, storing, of course, governance, privacy, all of those kinds of things. Then curation, accessibility, and then, presenting and reporting. Of course, there's, some people have 6 steps, 8 steps, whatever is in there for your data lifecycle, but that whole life cycle has to be paid attention to. And then, of course, the applications where it's coming from in the value chain. But those are then used to create your reports and metrics and everything else. And if you then have a method from which you're going to do the analysis, for example, when I pointed out contribution margin, now you have a strategy to create that core competency of being a data-driven company. It's not just having the data. And that's where I think a lot of people kind of get lost in that mix. Yes, of course, the data science skills, come into play. But even with data science skills, if you don't know how you want to analyze it and what's beneficial for your, company and industry, you don't really have a way to, get to using and drawing strategic insights from the data, if that makes sense. So anyway, that's kind of my short pitch on it. And hopefully you got something useful out of my my little excerpt there. Thank you.